Thank you, Tim. I'll just ask you to stay at the lectern and we will be opening it up to questions. And if you would be ready with a question, that'd be wonderful. Can I just ask a question of you, Tim? These past 3 years have been pretty rugged for you. You've had to take on the government and it has been very contentious. I'm just wondering if you could share with everyone where you drew your strength.
I'm a statutory officer who tries to do his job without fear or favour. And I see my job as being an advocate for racial tolerance and for speaking up against racial intolerance. Now, that will mean that from time to time, I may have a view which does not converge with that of the government of the day. I would hope that we can have debates about legislation or about political and social issues in a civil and respectful manner where disagreements can be acknowledged and accepted. But for me, I always think about the people who are affected by racism, and they're the members of the communities I come across day on day in my work. And I know how important it is for them to have laws which set a standard and which communicate what our values should be as a liberal, democratic, and multicultural society. Now, no law on its own will ever eradicate any social ill or evil. Having laws against murder over thousands of years has not prevented murder from happening. Racism will always occur when we have human frailty, but I cannot ever overlook the importance of having laws in place and in having voices in our public debate to ensure that we do not go backwards on race relations. So for me, it's about returning to the lived experience that people have on race and ensuring that we live up to the best of our traditions as a country.
Well, talk us through what you see as the responsibility of our political leaders to encourage tolerance and harmony.
Well, political leaders have to be prepared to defend our multiculturalism and our racial tolerance. And that means giving no succor or no support to those who may have messages of hatred, intolerance, or xenophobia. Leaders play an essential role in setting the tone for our society. And this, in some respects, is an intangible part of the work of leadership, but it cannot be overstated, the importance of setting the right tone. I would hope as well that in addition to tone, that political leaders can understand that it's important to give expression to any commitment to racial tolerance. Currently, that expression in legislative form is the Racial Discrimination Act. And I would hope that political leaders who are committed to racial tolerance can acknowledge the important role that laws like the Racial Discrimination Act play in giving practical expression to any leadership that they exercise at the rhetorical level.
Have you had dinner with the Attorney General?
Not dinner, but we do see the Attorney General frequently at the Human Rights Commission in various forms, and I think there would be no doubt on the part of any member of the community and on the part of parliamentarians who follow the debates about the Racial Discrimination Act, about the views that I hold on this matter.
Does anyone have a question? Okay. Sir.
Affairs editor of The Australian. My question falls into two parts. The first part, in light of your remarks about tolerance, do you regret anything that you've had to say about Bill Leak's cartoon? The second part of the question is this: was the Sydney Morning Herald wrong when it reported on August 4 last year that you had urged people to complain about that cartoon? If the Herald was wrong, did you attempt to set the record straight? And why did you tweet a link to the Herald story?
Well, I'll take those two questions from you, Chris. First, I made a public statement concerning Mr. Leak's cartoon about Aboriginal fathers, and I said that our society should not endorse racial stereotypes of Aboriginal, Australians, or for that matter, any ethnic or racial group in our society. Now, amid the public interest and debate about that cartoon, I fielded numerous queries from members of the public and media about what action the Australian Human Rights Commission would take on that matter. I responded by giving information about how anyone from an Aboriginal background who felt they had been racially offended, insulted, humiliated, or intimidated could do in lodging a complaint to the Australian Human Rights Commission. Now, I see it as part of my role, consistent with the Racial Discrimination Act and the functions outlined in that legislation, to provide people with information relating to the Racial Discrimination Act. Indeed, it's clearly stated in the statute that it is the role of the Commissioner to promote public understanding and acceptance of the Racial Discrimination Act. That naturally includes giving people information about how they can lodge a complaint if they believe they've experienced racial discrimination or racial hatred. I also made very clear in my answer to a query from Fairfax Media and in my statements on social media that there were clear exemptions provided to anything that is artistic work or that is fair comment on a matter of public interest. I've explained my statement and given accounts of it to 2 parliamentary committees, and anyone who's interested in reading more about it should look at the public record there. Your second question about correcting some of the mischaracterizations. Now, at no point did I ever use the word urge or encourage in making my statements. Those words were never used. That was used in a Fairfax Media report when it became clear that this was something that was rehearsed by others. I did attempt to correct the record. I did, for example, write a letter to the editor of the Australian Financial Review shortly after the matter broke in September, which made clear that I did not accept the characterization of me soliciting or urging complaints. No, I do my job without fear or favour.
I might take a question from a woman, the woman down the back. Thanks. And may I ask, I don't want to curb media freedom at all, but I'm sure that if anyone wants to have a little mini media conference with you, they could outside for 5 minutes, could they? So we have questions. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. My name's Ida Walker from the Australian Baha'i community. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on what you see as the role of religious communities and religious leaders in fostering this harmony. Do they bring something unique to the table? And perhaps what are some success stories that you've seen play out in Australian society that we could all learn from?
Well, absolutely. There is an important place for religious communities and groups to foster better understanding. Often fear and hatred are born of ignorance and of a lack of familiarity with those who are different. If we can have more conversations and more exchanges at the everyday level between people of different backgrounds, whether that's religious, whether that's ethnic, whether that's racial, or indeed whether it's of political opinion or ideology, we would be in a better place as a society to understand public debates and to empathise with others. And I think that is one of the crucial things perhaps that faith groups can do to encourage a more humane understanding of others, coming from particular traditions, but often, and I was having a conversation at lunch with someone about this, you don't appreciate your own perspective in a full way until you hear another person's perspective and put them side by side or reflect on your values. And I think that is something that is inherent to all religious traditions and faiths, the idea that you have to learn about a tradition, reflect on it, and then give it expression. And if we can bring that ethos to how we deal with cultural and moral differences and disagreements, then I absolutely believe we would be in a better place. I suspect with examples of intercultural dialogue, the work that Affinity does is just one example of the many good works that are being done in the realm of interfaith dialogue and conversations. But I suspect that Ahmet will be able to give you a better answer on what some of the success stories are on interfaith dialogue.
The gentleman in the third row. Yes.
Thank you very much. And Abe Kudan from the University of Sydney. My question is, how do you explain the rise of the nationalist populist view and our leadership running towards the dark corners and funding it and speak on their behalf?
Well, explaining the rise of anger and populist nationalism. This is a live question, and I know there is a variety of views about what is to blame for it. Certainly, it's been interesting to follow some of the debates in the United States about the rise of populist nationalism there. And I know that there's a division between some who would say that it is born of economic dislocation or economic disadvantage or envy, and those who would identify something more cultural or racial to the phenomenon. The most sensible answer to me seems that it's perhaps a combination of both, that there are some who may have been excluded from the global economy and the progress of globalization who are attracted to the strictures of populist nationalism, but there are others who are more motivated by cultural reasons, who believe that immigration brings with it threats to a national cultural order, or that it might undermine cultural integrity. How we can combat this is an important question for us. I think we can't give any sense of support to those who express views that are intolerant and bigoted. We hear a lot, for example, that it would be more healthy for us to seek to understand views rather than simply speak against them. Now, I think you do have to understand where people are coming from, but that should never be used as an excuse for any kind of hatred or incitement that may occur. So the response I would like to see from liberal democracies is one of solidarity, that we can give solidarity to those who are on the receiving end of racism and discrimination, and send a clear message that that sort of conduct is no longer tolerated.
We have time for one more question, and I'm just wondering if there's someone here who has had their hand up the longest. Could you be? Sorry.
Zia Ahmed from Australasian Muslim Times. I want to ask you, are there any provisions in the Anti-Discrimination Act regarding religious vilification? And how do you tackle it? Myself, coming from an Indian background, if somebody called me an Indian terrorist, which I suppose not many people will do that, I can actually come to you and ask you some help. But if somebody called me a Muslim terrorist, I feel that I don't have anywhere to go.
So the Racial Discrimination Act does not cover religion as an attribute. It covers race, color, ethnicity, and national origin. So if you experience conduct that relates to any of those attributes, you may seek to find a remedy through the Racial Discrimination Act. But in circumstances where only a religious attribute is targeted, the law may offer you no assistance. Now, there are some groups in our society whose identity is regarded as being ethno-religious in character. For example, those of Jewish background are regarded as having an identity that is both religious and ethnic in character. The same has been established within the case law with respect to those of a Sikh background. But as yet, there has been no case law in Australia, to my knowledge, which has established a Muslim identity as an ethno-religious one. There's one nuance here that I want to make clear. Quite often people will jump from that answer that I've given to saying that Muslims are excluded from protection under the Racial Discrimination Act. And I think that involves a slight confusion. The Racial Discrimination Act provides protection to Christian Australians, to Buddhist Australians, to Hindu Australians, to Muslim Australians, to Jewish Australians, to Australians of no faith, to agnostic Australians. Where race is involved, whatever your religious background, you can seek a remedy under the law, but it's got to involve a racial element. But that's one thing that I do think is important to underline, because people will jump from saying, well, because a Muslim background is not covered as an attribute, as equivalent to an attribute under the RDA, therefore Muslims are not protected by the RDA. That's not a proper characterization of the law.
Gosh, we could go on for quite some time on that issue. Tim Soutphommasane, thank you so much. Stay here. Thanks for sharing your insights on such important topics. I'd now like to call upon the Deputy Police Commissioner, Catherine Byrne, to present a gift to Tim on behalf of the Affinity Intercultural Foundation and a photo opportunity. Affinity relies on local businesses and individuals to fund many programs and events. They deserve our most sincere thanks, because without their support, it would not be easy for Affinity to bring all of us together. Today's sponsor is, and close your ears, ABC reporters shouldn't be thanking sponsors, Mr. Oz Kagler, Director of Affinity and Information Security Risk Analyst at HSBC. Unfortunately, he is overseas, so Tim will present a gift to his friend Ishmael Adogan. Finally, I would now like to call on Mr. Ahmed Polat, Executive Director of Affinity, to deliver the vote of thanks and conclude the program. Thank you.